afternoon to our live audience on Facebook. This afternoon with me, we celebrate a very important event with the United Nations 75 years anniversary. As we celebrate the United Nations anniversary and the 45 years of the United Nations in Papua New Guinea, the UN has been hosting live forums in each region of the country. So these forums invite young Papua New Guineans to a conversation that has been achieved, and more importantly, what it is to be done to achieve a just and peaceful society for all. Our fourth panel, Peaceful Home and Peaceful Community, invites experts working in mental health, community development to discuss the challenges they see in ending violence against women and girls and pathways that we believe can help prevent violence before it starts. This panel is broadcast live on Facebook, and I am your host. I'm your moderator, Hidedi Mokari. I work as a senior project coordinator for the Kokoda Track Foundation, and my work in advocacy is based around women and girls, young people, and boys in the communities, and empowering them with information, skills, and ideas for better living. This afternoon with me, I'd like to introduce each of the panels to you. We have Jonathan. Jonathan works with World Vision PNG as the Key Population CSO Engagement Officer. He is an advocate for LGBTQ individuals and communities with the Spotlight Initiative, which was launched in March 18 for Tosby. I'd like to move and introduce to you Dr. Joyce. She's a practicing psychiatrist with an MBBS degree, and as a medical practitioner dealing with injuries related to violence is a daily routine for us in Papua New Guinea. However, finding the opportunity to address it via such a panel is a privilege to work with others interested in the issues within our communities. Moving on to Yanamli Nyana. She's the coordinator for Sentencing Passing Campaign, our flagship program of the Papua New Guinea Tribal Foundation that focuses on addressing gender-based violence and sorcery accusation related violence in Papua New Guinea by taking a culturally sensitive and holistic approach towards its delivery in urban to rural communities in the country. Now here with me is Rosemary Howie. She is the youth advocate and ambassador for the United Nations Population Fund. She was one of the 3 participants to attend the Summit for International Conference for Population Development, ICPD, in 2019 November. Welcome all to our session, and what a great experience to be seated here today to have the hard conversations and also be really open in this platform as we discuss gender-based violence in our communities, in our homes, and how we can eliminate it before it starts. So let me dive just straight into our questions. So my first question is to anyone who wants to go first, and I'd like to know what are the main challenges that women and girls face in PNG to live a happy, safe, and healthy life. So who would like to go first?
I'll go first. So among the many challenges women and girls face today in Papua New Guinea to live a safe, happy, and healthy life, there are 3 main challenges that I would like to share and talk about. One being the most common is the domestic and gender-based violence. This includes physical, sexual, psychological, verbal, and socio-economical violence. Now, more and more women and girls have reported to be being abused in these forms of violence at home, in the workplace, even out in the public and the wider community. Living in the city alone isn't safe for young girls. I myself have been harassed by a young man in the streets, in the communities, especially at the bus stops. Now, all of this, I believe, is due to economical issues. So this is one of the reasons, or the challenges that women and girls are facing. Another one is more focused on the sexual and reproductive health and rights. Now, more and more women and girls in Papua New Guinea don't have access to the appropriate information, services required to adequately protect themselves from unwanted pregnancies, STDs, HIV and AIDS. And so we have a lot of these issues increasing.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to share?
It's
Jonathan?
Yeah, so I'm from the LGBTI community. I'm a trans person, and I represent the Key Population Advocacy Consortium, which is made out of 3 networks. That's Friends Frangipani, Sex Workers Organization, and also Couple Champions, men with diverse sexuality and transgender people, and also our friends living with HIV. So we formed Key Population, and I'm also the coordinator with also a subgroup here in NCD. It's called the ETURA NCD LGBT group. I'm employed with World Vision as the KP, Key Population CSO desk person, coordinating the advocacy consortium programs in the 7 IBEDN provinces where Global Fund is based. So the government, our government, have better knowledge of the status and the spread of HIV in the countries through the IBBS, or the Integrated Behavioural Survey done by the PNG IMR, and HIV-related gender-based violence. I would like to reinforce, according to findings, in the IBEDN provinces, like gender-based violence is very high within my community, and then this violence is not reported, because if we try to report it, we become perpetrators of the, to the law enforcement as well. This is why this is unaired, or we don't go forward to report cases of gender-based violence, which is also very bad. So some of the types include sexual, physical, verbal, and psychological abuses. So the factors to such abuses, include lack of acceptance, rejection by family members as well, and there is high stigma and discrimination within our community. Bullying in schools. That's why you will see that most of my community members, the highest qualification or the education, they can go as far as grade or primary level 6 and not further. So these are some of the things within my community. And we also have religious norms as well, and general negativity, attitude from public. So like most places, maybe where I want to go, I need to select those places, like it's not safe for me. So these are some of the things. And there is also obvious that like communities, in my community, we have health-related issues, which are very high rates of HIV, because we cannot access because of this high stigma and discrimination and what we will get from healthcare providers. And also we have like there's lots of lost to follow-ups in our community, very poor adherence to HIV drugs if my community members are on ART, and abuse of alcohol and drugs is also very high due to all this stress and So there was a recent survey done by the PNGIMR again with UNAIDS and the consortium, and it indicated that including friends living with HIV from my community, there was lots of mental issues related to GBV cases, and increase of very high increase of stigma and discrimination. So some of the things, so we, like the COVID-19 also brought in also additional stigma and discrimination, where most of my community members, they don't live with their families because of rejection, and then they live with friends. So with this COVID-19, they were sort of like forced to go back to their families, but then the acceptance levels was very low. So these are some of the issues within my community. We had a survey. It was a peer-led survey. It was done by the trans community ourselves, and on the rights and sexual experiences of trans community, and we have high rates of like almost 80% of the people we had in our survey were unemployed or never been to school. So this is some of the things, and then the layers and layers of discrimination. So my community is just wondering when will this end. Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. Sometimes it's really hard to thank you for coming out and sharing your experiences, but also really sharing with us some of the research that have been done in the community. And I think a lot of times we don't really look into that issues. We don't look into the challenges that your community faces. And so I'm really thankful that you've come out and shared this experience about having that acceptance in your communities, but also having that in our families. So we're looking at gender-based violence in our homes and in our communities, and if we're not safe as humans, then where is safety? So I'll jump to our next question, or you would like to share one of you would like to share what are some of the challenges that you face as women and girls in our communities?
I would like to share a little bit about growing up in the village. All my life, I was in the city for the last 6 years, but it's very tough in the village. As we know that 80% of Papua New Guinea population are in the rural communities, and only 20% can be found in urban areas. So some of the main issues that women and girls face in order to live a safe, happy and healthy life is access to health and access to education, information, very, very vital information, even though they can be uneducated. But if information is made available to them in a more simplified form, they will be able to understand this and make very good choices for themselves. And one of the things that is standing out most these days is unemployment. So when we take the traditional context of living in the rural communities into light, we will see that most of the time women are expected to be in the house and expected to just be a wife and be a mom, work in the garden, which is basically happening every day in the 80% of the population living in rural communities. One of the things is it's accepted and it's a traditional way of doing things, but how do we empower our men and our boys to realize that these values that they have, these roles that they play, is very vital in making sure the community is a balanced community. If women don't work in the garden, then it puts pressure on men, and it can instigate violence because men are expecting too much of the women or the females in the community. So striking that balance and highlighting the importance of why roles of women and girls are important in the community to our men is very, very vital. And I always like to stress this, that we 20% probably understand what is happening around the world right now, but 80% they don't. So how do we massage, how do we contextualize, how do we simplify very, very vital informations that can help them live a safe, happy and healthy life? So making sure that health is accessible in all its form, health in all its form, education in all its form. Could be going to school, or it could be having a center where it's providing reproductive awareness, or family planning or whatnot. Holistic approach in these areas is very important. And yeah, what we see in Port Moresby is not what it looks like in the 80% of the population community in the country. So it's very, very important that if we want to make sure our women and girls are happy and safe, we have to make these very vital services accessible to them. And there's a lot of stakeholders that are involved in making sure that happens, like government, NGOs, international development partners, and everyone like the UN, EU, and all the other developing partners who are already helping in making sure these services are available, and we hope that the government is making sure these things are prioritized and services are really delivered to our rural communities.
Thank you, Yanamne. I really like the way the three panelists you have captured some of the challenges that you face: gender-based violence in our homes, in the workplace, in the bus stops, access to health, education, information, also to mental health, the rejection when we go back home, how does that look like in our homes, and the layers of discrimination, which is a challenge in itself, that we cannot as individuals solve this because there are layers that we need to confront in our communities. Now, Yanamnin had said something about, accepting the women's roles and you mentioned something about safety. Now that leads us into our next question. Now most of the time we think of violence, we focus on violence in the homes, and we think about it and we focus on the issues that are happening, the situation that is happening, and the violence that's happening in our homes and in our communities. But I'd like to ask this question now to Doctor. What do you think is, or what do you imagine or feel when we look at two different scenarios? Now, violence in the homes, but now, what does a peaceful home look like, and what does a peaceful community look like?
Thank you, Lydia. Listening to all this, and then reading that concept about, we're talking about background of gender-based violence, but coming from a peaceful home perspective or peaceful community perspective. Talking about peace. Why are we talking about peace? Because we have violence. Violence is so prevalent that humanity calls for action for us to talk about peace. What is peace? That perception of peace itself, we were talking about perception, how each culture, each individual, no matter the gender, how we perceive peace in a community setting, in our own individual, individually how we perceive peace, that can also relate into the community, yeah. And then, how do we speak that in terms of peace within our community? We talk about one of the things, with all these barriers, challenges that we face, it comes from that perception. Initially, violence came up because of conflict, and conflict came up because of two sides. So when we perceive something, and if those two sides have perceived it in different aspects of it and decided to have peace, they will have peace. We have to have a common ground, and we were talking about it before this discussion, that we talk about humanity. Humanity, when you talk about humanity, what is humanity? Yeah. And humanity is something that will call us all together. And in humanity, in our culture, can be different. Could be our cultural beliefs, traditions, could be the religious, things that we bring us together, so that we share that humanity with each other. So that perception, I was trying to, I really think that we should focus on perception, because when you talk about violence, we as a medical practitioner, we deal with it all the time in the hospital. We see different types of forms of violence, from physical, emotional, psychological. Physical includes sexual, all this. And we are there to help. You want to make a change. How do we make a change? It starts from changing that person's perception. How will I address it at my home level? And usually when we deal with violence, it's not because it's a one-off thing that comes to you for the first time. It's a cumulative thing. It comes to you at the end. When it comes to the medical aspect of it, it's actually after so many. Started from a small issue to a big issue, now it's with you. And it's at that point, their perception is different. Whether they will make peace first, with the perpetrator or not. And then it brings us to the issue of, when I'm talking about humanity, we address all the genders. Because the perpetrator, how are we dealing with the perpetrator? You see, maybe we are dealing with the victims. We should look at dealing with the perpetrator. Come up with incentive in the community level, individual level, to family level, to community level. That will get the perpetrator to address peace, address violence, change them. Why are they being violent? Maybe culturally, certain parts of Papua New Guinea, as you pointed out in the highlands, they're more prone to violence. They have grown up in violence. It's like normal to them. They've normalized it. How do we deal with it? It's very important. So I believe that was a very important point in mentioning our perception of peace and in different aspects, how do we address it in terms of humanity? And each one of us, and maybe a challenge back to the listeners and the viewers, and about within you as an individual. It comes back to the 3 questions that was asked by UNFPA. How we manage ourselves first, and then we can space for reflection, reflect within ourselves, how we perceive that peace within ourselves. That goes to perception. And then we can think, feel, and live peacefully. When we think about something all the time, whatever, we start feeling it and we start living it. So in terms of peace, that's a thing. But we have to speak it, as you were saying, how do we break it down to the 80% of those in the community? How do we talk to them? There's something common that we can go through that, maybe religious, traditional, or cultural. That's how we go through to speak the language of peace. On top of that, there's something that we were thinking about incentive within the community. Apart from, within the community itself, LLG, about district incentive, you can go up on the government incentive, NGOs. What incentives are there to support those activities of peace at that level? We can look at that and see how we can promote peace at that level, and how it starts from the household.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I really like how you said about humanity and having sort of the humanity is the starting point and talking about the language of peace. That's really important. And you talked about, perception, and that's important for us to also build into our homes and into our communities. Does anyone else like to add?
I would like to. I'll probably take less than 3 minutes. At Tribal Foundation, we are a locally internationally based organization where we always are looking for ways to reintegrate very, very big global ideas into, contextualized terms or contextualized way of doing things, solutions. So I absolutely agree with you on the note that we need to address the perpetrators, because if we leave out the perpetrators most of the time, we are focusing on the victims, we won't, I believe, as an individual, that we won't progress the issue of addressing gender-based violence at home and in the community, because most of the violence is caused by the perpetrator. There needs to be more perpetrator education, and in terms of making them aware of the laws that are in place in our country, making them aware of the responsibilities that they have in the community. And most of the time, statistics show that perpetrators are mostly males in the community, in the family. And I believe as a Papua New Guinean and as a Melanesian woman, not all men are violent. Not all men in Papua New Guinea are violent. There are so many good men out there, so many good fathers, great fathers who are bringing their daughters up, who are looking after their wives very well. But how can we come up with ways that we can zero down to those who need help, the real perpetrators who need help, and helping them progress in life? Because one of the things that I feel about perpetrators is this might be their SOS, this might be their call to help, like they don't have hope. Every day they wake up, they have no hope to look forward to the next day. So they are going through this kind of situations where that's the only time that they feel powerful, is by dominating. So how do we help them to massage that strength they have? But it's coming out in a toxic way. They have a lot of strength when they're violent. So how do we massage that strength to be released in a positive way, that they start to look after their families, they start to look after their community? And so absolutely agree with Doctor that we need more perpetrator education. And as a Tribal Foundation, what Senesin Passing does is, Senesin Passing is an anti-violence value-based campaign, flagship program of Tribal Foundations. We try as much as possible to talk more in communities, focusing on perpetrators and helping them understand the value system in each community, the value system that as a Papua New Guinean we should follow, as a Melanesian we should follow, because every community comes from a traditional background, come from a cultural background, and so we have our own value system that we can learn from. Not all value systems culturally are good, but some are really good in strengthening families and creating peaceful communities. And so how do we reintegrate that? So the campaign focuses more on values. We look at men, what are their value structure? We look at women, what are their values? We start to appreciate these values that they have. And in that way, hoping that the more we appreciate each other of the work and the roles that each one play, we begin to have a common understanding of what a peaceful family, what a peaceful community can look like when both men and women start to understand each other and work together, not compete, not run against one another, but understand the differences that they have, the different power that each one have, and work together to really make the families and the community safe. So, thank you.
Rosemary, do you want to
Yes,
add on?
I totally agree with the both of you. From an advocate of gender-based violence and child abuse, I would focus more on the gender equality. So I believe in having a peaceful home and community. It comes from having gender equality, participation of women in all spheres of development. We've heard of the phrase, behind every man is a woman. So if we can accept and live by this quote, I can guarantee that we will live a peaceful family. We'll have a peaceful home and peaceful community for women, men, and children.
Thank you. So we really talked about looking at it mentally. From a small issue, it leads up to a big issue, which can turn into self-harm and harm towards other people in our homes. And we're looking at having education not only to the victims but also to the perpetrators, and that's what you both are doing. And you really mentioned the important point about gender equality in the homes and having equal participation to have peaceful homes and peaceful societies. And when we're talking about our communities, when we're talking about the homes that we live in, we're affected by gender-based violence one way or the other. We see it, do we report it or not? And do we even have the services that provide for it? And so when it comes to our communities, when it comes to living as individuals in our homes, in our societies, one thing that's affected us this year is the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I'd like to direct this question to Jonathan. And I'd like to ask Jonathan, from where you work and your and the LGBTQI community, how have you dealt with stress in this time of COVID-19, and how have your relationships, your relationships with your families, with your friends, what are some of the experiences that you can share with us today?
Thank you, Lydia. So, like self-isolation, like for my community, we've been self-isolated. COVID-19 or not COVID-19, we've been isolated from the communities because like of stigma and discrimination. But how can we be part of the community? How can we have those spaces? So like the COVID-19 actually, like before I mentioned that most of our community members, they don't live with families because of rejection, and they live with friends or with other people. And then when COVID-19 was there, people were asked to stay back or in isolation and go back to families. And then some of the community members were displaced. For them to go back to their families or relatives, like they were thinking of acceptance, would they be accepted back? So those are some of the things that were affecting the community. Yeah. So, and then I mentioned about, it brought on new stigma and discrimination to the community ourselves. So, and then how we dealt with the stress was like peer to peer. This is the only way we do it. So we tend to our peers and look for comfort and all that. And then we know that there are people from our community. They know there are help services like mental health and counseling, but they don't know where to go to. Like there is no clear indication where they are located, or there is no like referral or mapping where So, and then there is about if they go to these services, will they be turned away? So those type of things. So these are some of the things that's affecting my community. But we are part of the community. We are part of the population, and then we have our new human rights as everybody else. Yes.
Thank you for sharing that with me. Doctor, what about some of the experiences that you've had through this COVID-19 pandemic? What are some of the changes that you have seen in the homes, in the place that you work, in the communities, and in your space of work?
Thank you. I think before I answer that question, one of the things I believe this is a good space for all of us to network and create something. As Jonathan clearly pointed out, for my part, in terms of mental health, the services, it's not just in mental health, education, they have problem, law and order, some problem. How do we reach out through our, to network, so we bring that service to each other, to that population of need. And what you are facing is actually a national issue because of not enough of this particular resource in the country, and when it's in the public setting, it's highly stigmatized and it's not available, not to the rural centers, as you say. So it's something that we should look into, and I believe UN can come into helping us to get that done. We have programs that we want to look into, that we can actually network with our others in the provinces, even down to the village level. Okay, thank you for that. I think one of the issue for Papua New Guinea in terms of dealing with the stress being increased, and sometimes with the COVID-19, with the restriction, people stay at home. So usually if they have a conflict at home, it increases. So we have a lot of increase in gender-based violence, as you say. We also had loss of jobs, because the way the work dynamic was breaking down, because the stress starting from the manager level down. So you have a lot of people who lost their job, and then the impact of it, increasing criminal activities because of it, just petty crimes in the city. So we are having cases coming in with physical injury. We have cases of sexual injury because of that too. So it's something that, and then on top of that, in the country, we are having a problem with medicines in our hospitals. So not everyone, all the medicines, not all of them are available when they come to. And I think at one point in time during the COVID-19, our main hospital was restricted to the general public, and I believe that was really impacting on a lot of people at that time too. So mainly resources were affected, plus increase because of that impact. People are not accessing what they should get during that time, and the increase in, people feeling anxious, agitated, and restlessness getting onto violence.
Yeah, I think that's really true.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone else want to share what were your experiences during the lockdown, and how did you deal with your stress and with your family's relationships and in the communities? What were some of the things that you had observed during this COVID-19 pandemic?
I would like to share a little bit from, I'm actually a student of IBS University. So we had to stay at home and do online classes. We couldn't go to school because, all tertiary institutions were on lockdown, including secondary schools, all schools. So we had to spend a lot of money on flex card, on top cards, write prepaids to go online, and with the economic issues, because COVID-19 affected it. It was really hard for many of my fellow friends in school. to a point where they were gonna protest for the school to shut down completely because it was really hard for them. So yeah, that was one of the issues that some of my fellow students faced.
Thank you for sharing that. I think we'll move to ask if anyone has any questions on Facebook. One question.
So if I've got one question, this is from Megan, who asks, not only men are perpetrators of violence, there are some cultural and social norms that drive violence against women and girls. What are some interventions relevant to the PNG context that can be available to address this?
Doctor, you want to go?
Thank you very much. Yep. It's a very interesting question in terms of PNG context. I think in terms of PNG context, when it comes to addressing violence, we thought that our sharing culture that we share a lot, that can also help when we share in terms of getting, for example, perpetrators who don't think that they are perpetrators because it's governed by the cultural and the ideology at that time. So get them to help, victims of violence. So within their own community, because you cannot get them out of their community, within their community, within their family. And if they are in there, they can be able to challenge their own self-biases about those things and help them to change. In terms of sharing, that's one thing that I can think of. But in terms of sharing, any one of you can come up with something in terms of addressing this issue. It's not just men being perpetrators of violence, but there are other things that also bring about violence. What is it like? Maybe criminal activities or other things like conflicts, ethnic conflicts.
I'll just share from the perspective of socio-related violence.
Yes.
It's a belief that's instigating the violence first, then giving a go at the people to attack. So it's like I've said earlier, some of the cultural beliefs, some of the cultural values and norms are not good as we look today at the modern and contemporary world. Some of these views that we used to have before are no longer valued today, and some of them are very dangerous as well. So the more we harbor it, the more we pass the knowledge down to the next generation, we only escalate the violence that are associated with it. So in social-related violence, it's the accusation that starts the violence. The violence is not perpetrated on the spot by men or women in the community. It's the accusation that starts it, and then upon the accusation, people attack the accused of social-related violence. And I think that's one of the cultural beliefs that is driving violence, or that is enforcing violence in the communities, making more than, 10,000 people, especially families of the accused, being displaced. Because when it comes to social related violence, it's not only the mom that is accused is on the run, it's the whole family. If the mom has sister and brother, it's the whole family that is moved out, or that is excluded or excommunicated from the village, and it can affect the grandparents of the one accused as well. So it follows the family tree. So when it's very dangerous, and it's not something that we as Papua New Guinean, as young generation, we would like to pass this knowledge down to our young people or the children that are coming up. So we are at a stage where we are choosing now. We are choosing what perception we want to take in. We are choosing what kind of belief system we want to hold. We are choosing what kind of value system we want to pass on to our next generation. So this is kind of like a transition point for every Papua New Guineans to really think about what does our future, what is PNG's future look like in probably 10 or 15 years. And if we're going to continue down this path, how do we see ourselves in the next 10 to 15 years time? So it's some of the things that as young Papua New Guineans and everyone who are citizens of Papua New Guinea, whatever, we need to think seriously about the future of our country. And what kind of things we want to hold and work with.